Hi, my name is Charlie McGrath. I am the founder of WideAwakeNews.com, host of Wide Awake News Radio that broadcasts on the Rinse radio network. Are we on the verge of civil war in this country? Now, if you said that to somebody who was completely asleep, who just plugs into the mainstream propaganda, they would think you were absolutely crazy. But according to Doug Hagman, he's a private investigator, also one of the founders of Northeast Intelligence Network, that's exactly where we are. Now, before we get into Doug's story, I want to take a look at where we're at in this country and where we're at in the rest of the so-called West right now. In 2008, we lost any form of representative government. We had our representatives go before the cameras and say we're not going to authorize this bailout. We all know the result. The Dow fell 600 plus points the next day. Carte blanche was given to a bunch of central banks and a bunch of private banks that make up the ownership of these central banks. Now, inside of Europe, it was a little bit different story. You have 17 nations that use the euro as a currency. Each one of them has a representative government. These are stumbling blocks that need to be taken out one at a time. So we started with Greece. We started with Greece and getting rid of their leadership, putting in technocrats. Then we did the same thing in Italy. Then we passed so-called bailouts, giving more wealth and power to the private banks that own the central banks of the world. And that was claimed to be success. Now we see the same thing happening in Spain, where it's going to be a much larger problem. So we have technocrats being installed inside of Europe. We have the United States government that has been completely taken over by private banks. And we are on track to the what I call the New World Order's global financial governance, their announced plan that they were going to implement. So how on earth would we have civil war if the New World Order's plan is right on track? Well, there's a slight problem. Inside of Europe, these 17 countries that make up the nations that use the euro, the folks are catching on. The people are catching on. And this is being helped by outrageous acts of civil disobedience and civil pushback, such as people killing themselves in front of Parliament because of onerous austerity that's being implemented in Greece. People are waking up because of groups such as Occupy movements, Occupy the World. People are realizing that all this austerity, all these bailouts, all this talk of indebting nations is going to save the private banks that brought these nations to the brink in the first place. The same private banks that just happen to make up the ownership of the central banks around the world. So we see an election in France that is going to get rid of Sarkozy and is going to put in a president that is going to say enough with the austerity. Now, this plan, Plan B, I think was planned for as well. If you can't take it over by buffaloing the people that more debt is the solution, then we will go to Plan B, which is implement chaos around the world. How are you going to do that? Well, according to Doug Hagman and his inside source at the Department of Homeland Security, it's a dollar collapse. You collapse the US dollar and everything falls apart. What would that look like inside this country, where we have millions, 310 plus million people in this nation, the vast majority of them believing everything is under control because somebody on television tells them it is, and somebody in Washington, D.C. tells them it is, and the Dow Jones is hovering around 13,000 points. All it takes is China, who's not quite extremely happy with the United States because of our meddling inside the Middle East and North Africa, calling in their marker on $1 trillion of debt, or Russia going to the plan that they've announced that they would like to pursue, which is an alternative currency, perhaps something backed in U.S. gold, and then we have instant dollar crisis. Now, Doug Hagman isn't the only one saying this, even though his inside source paints a picture that seems to be credible. We have Gerald Celente coming out last year talking about this year, in 2012, we will have a currency crisis leading to a dollar collapse, leading to civil unrest and pushback. So is it just coincidence that everything from the Patriot Act up till now was put in place to fight fictitious terrorist wars around this planet, or was it put into place in order to corral the people of this country that stepped up and said enough is enough? If we look at National Defense Authorization Act 2012, that's exactly what it does. It makes people like myself and others in alternative media, and you, if you dare to speak out, a potential enemy of the state you can be black-bagged and gotten rid of. Recently, a report came out, FM 3-39.40, an Army manual that shows re-education camps being set up in this country so political dissidents can be re-educated or dealt with. Now, a lot of people think that this is having to do with foreign wars, but it's not. If you read this document, it's for inside this country as well. We have Samantha Powers being put at the head of this new branch of government, this Atrocities Prevention Board, that basically says any government that can't take care of its people should have a UN type force, an international force, come in and take over. All these legislation, and many of them I'm not even mentioning in this video, they all point to one thing: that Doug Hagman and his source may be absolutely correct. Maybe the Department of Homeland Security is expanding the military or this security industrial complex in order to put the boot heel of tyranny on the people of this country. Maybe they're buying millions and millions of rounds of ammunition, not to go after terrorism, but to go after the people of this country who dare to speak out. America, it is time to wake up and realize what you're hearing by the mainstream media is garbage. What you're hearing from these would-be politicians that would be the president, such as Romney and Santorum, they are towing the party line. Wake up and realize we're heading for a place that none of us can even probably imagine at this point. But the number one thing you must realize is the information you're being fed by the mainstream is generated for a purpose, and that is to sway your opinion that everything is under control, and the people that are before these cameras in Washington, D.C., on Wall Street, have your best interest at heart. Everything that is based in reality points to the exact opposite of that fact. We don't see things improving for the people of this country, even though propaganda comes out and says so. We don't see unemployment getting better, even though the propagandists tell you it's 8.1%. We see participation rates shrinking to the lowest they've been in nearly 40 years. We see more and more people joining groups such as Occupy Wall Street or the Tea Party movement. And now we see the FBI stepping up and making criminals out of these people. We see more onerous security industrial complex being talked about every single day in this country. We see legislation put in place to deal with citizens that dare to push back, and we see an apparatus that is closing in on the people of this country. Stories are attached. That's all I got.